Over the years, the house on the hill has gone through changes in names, changes in appearance, changes in owners, and changes in uses, but yet has always remained the house on the hill. This house has been more than just a home to many residents, but rather a beacon of success and culture of the community since its construction by Bennett Bunn in 1830. Bunn, a wealthy plantation owner and businessman, was a mainstay of social and business activities in the Rocky Mount area during the first half of the 1800s. Ownership of the house has exchanged through auctions, wills, purchases, and donations to a variety of owners, but yet Stonewall has remained a symbol of posterity with a view of history through a preserved lens. Through the changes in ownership, Stonewall Manor acquired different names over time. It began with the title Little Falls Plantation House, named after the plantation that Bennett Bunn owned. Upon Bunn's death in 1849, the house was bought by Richard J. Harrison, and under his ownership the estate became known, unoriginally and self-explanatory, as the Brick House Place. After his death, Harrison presented the property to his nephew, Keenan Lewis, leading to another name change, this time becoming the Lewis House. After the Lewis family's interest in the house came to an end in 1917, the house was sold to Rocky Mount Mills. The company insisted that the estate be permanently referred to as Stonewall Manor, relating to the wall of stone surrounding the front of the house that it is now famous for. Stonewall Manor not only changed names and owners over time, but in appearance as well. Its famous white columns on what some consider the front porch, and a double-decked screened-in sleeping porch on the back side was not added until after 1900. Advancing with the technology of the time as well, electricity, running water, and plumbing were also added. Finally, in the 1970s, the signature stone wall was moved closer to the manor to make room for Highway 64, and the manor was added to the National Register of Historic Places.
On the north side is to be seen as the most beautiful grove, containing a store, several neat shops for doctors, lawyers, tailors, etc., a large and commodious meeting house, and a little removed is the tavern of Colonel Daniel, who is now making additions to his house and will no doubt soon be able to accommodate numerous boarders. At the distance of 100 yards, in the most delightful situation, is the splendid mansion of the wealthy, accomplished, and amiable Mr. Bunn, which would do credit to a city. On the south side there are several handsome buildings occupied as dwellings, a dry goods store, a cotton store, several neat warehouses, grist mills, and last though not least, the splendid cotton factory of the Messrs. Battles. This alone to anyone who has never seen anything of the kind is well worth the ride from Ocracoke Inlet. Visitor from Ocracoke, 1837.
Stonewall Manor is a federal-styled home made of Flemish bond brick. This large antebellum plantation house was built from bricks from Bennett Bunn's brickyard. During this time period, frame houses were very popular, unlike the brick facade of Stonewall. Each wall was 22 inches thick with brick. The house is a hip-roofed house instead of a gable-roofed house. The use for two entrances was not uncommon for plantation houses. The house is very spacious with a central hallway that includes 2 rooms on each side. Every room on the first floor has a fireplace with individually hand-carved wooden mantels. Stonewall has a full above-ground basement with ionic pilasters. The front door is a 6-panel federal door, and on top there is a semicircular lunette. There was originally a portico on the rear of the house along with a deck called a sleeping porch. When entering the house, you will notice the twin elliptical stairs, also known as horseshoe stairs, with fine railing, newels, and balusters. Over the years of Stonewall, both entrances have been used as the front and the back.
Stonewall Manor was built roughly about 1830, bearing in mind it took probably 2 years to build a house. Probably the best thing to do is start with Bennett himself right before the War of 1812. Just before that war, he went downriver to a little place called Bennsboro, which is in Pitt County. It's close to Faulkner. And the Bunn family did naval stores, tar, pitch, and turpentine, and sold them basically to Great Britain, and that's what they did. So he went down there to make business dealings, and he was doing business with a man called Benjamin Atkinson. And he stayed down there for several years, and they bought land together and dealt together. And then Atkinson would go downstream even farther to the coast to do business dealings. To make a long story short, there was something going on between Atkinson's wife and Bennett, okay? And then after the war, Mr. Atkinson passed away. And so Bennett and Sally got married. That was in 1816. somewhere about in that same time period, Bennett's daddy gave him this land in his will on this particular spot on this side north of Stony Creek. So they came back up here and were married, and they had a son called William Bennett. The only son, that was their only son. And they lived here for years and years, and then, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. His Uncle Reuben married his mother. Bennett's Uncle Reuben married his mother. That way, that put him in a position that Uncle Reuben died in 1826. So he inherited everything his father had, which had gone to his mother. And his mother married Uncle Reuben. And when Uncle Reuben died, all that wealth came into one point to Bennett. So he inherited all this wealth from different directions. Not to mention, Sally was wealthy also, because she came from a wealthy plantation family herself, and she married Benjamin Atkinson, and she inherited all of that when he died. So they sold all their land they had in Pitt County to Sally's son, and then they came here to Stonewall. And they used the granite from the Rocky Mountain Mills, which it was Battling Company at the time, Rocky Mountain Mills. Now they use the granite from the mill, which the dam is down there now, and the mill races is still down there at the mill. They used the granite for the foundations. And back in those days, we had longleaf pine. In this part of the state, it was all longleaf pine, virgin timber. They cut the longleaf pine and used it for the structures of the house, the main supports, and so forth. They used white oak to do the shingles, and to build it, they have lath on the walls, and then it would be plaster over top of that. So it was built out of that, and then of course they built it out of brick. There's another house in here in town that's called Bemenu, and Bemenu was built in 1844, and there was a brickyard on that plantation that Bennett owned. And we don't know whether he sold the brick and did that commercially, or he just made the brick for Stonewall itself. The bottom two floors of Stonewall are 22 inches thick, solid brick. The top floor is only 16 inches thick, so it's a very substantial house. Well, they kept on going along. They've been in the house about 20 years, and they had ended up owning, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1,200 acres of land in Edgecombe and 1,000 in Nash, more or less, plus other various pieces of land he had around the area. And in those days, there were very few banks. There was one bank, I think, in Tarbert, one in Wilmington. There were no banks here. And if you wanted to buy something, you had to get somebody to stand. They would say stand security for you at the courthouse. Today we call that collateral. So you would stand security, which means you signing the loan, in other words. Well, Bennett got cholera in May of 1849, and he died just like that. And he had no will. With no will, the security at the courthouse disappeared. So all the loans and bonds and all those types of things that he stood security for, there was no more security. So they called all the loans due, all the bonds came due. Some of these bonds had to do with repairing bridges in this area, schools. They were financing the railroad and all kinds of stuff. And with that gone, all the loans in the neighborhood came due that he had stood security for. So what they had to do in the end was go to the court and petition the court to sell the estate. They had to sell every bit of it. The house, the household servants, the furniture, the livestock, the crops, the turpentine distillery, everything. He sold it all. It took 5 days to sell it. And of course the family, his son was also forced to sell just before that in July. The sale was in November, but in July, down here on Hunter Hill Road, the sons had put his stuff up for auction also. And Sally, which is his mother, bought the place, 70 acres of land, and the house for $750 cash. So that's where she left here. We went down over here to this house, which is not there anymore. It's Highway 301 now. And that's where they were living. But the sale itself happened here in November. I believe it was November the 5th through the 9th or something like that. It was a week, took a week to sell it. Everything here, all the household furniture, everything. All the land at Little Falls Plantation, which is Edgecombe County line right down the road. And everything in Nash County. Sold everything they had and then they moved over here to that house. So as far as my family's concerned, we were out of here the 9th of November, 1849.
Bennett Bunn was a pillar of the Rocky Mount community. Due to this status, Bunn was often called upon for financial security, the equivalent to co-signing on a loan. After his death, the loans Bunn acted as security for were called in, amounting to debts of $82,828. His most notable debts included taxes, personal bonds, bank loans, and his contribution as chairman of the community school. Due to the extensiveness of his debts, all of Bunn's lands and possessions, including Stonewall Manor, were auctioned in a 5-day sale. On the first day of the sale, November 5, 1849, the majority of his household items were sold. Bunn's widow, Sally, purchased many of the items she once called her own, including her house slaves. Her purchases were unopposed by other bidders. The second day sale, the Bunn lands in Edgecombe County were sold, as well as the plantation farm equipment and slaves. Crops, livestock, and animal feed were sold on the third day. The fourth day, only slaves were sold, and the widow Bunn purchased a slave Frank for only 10 cents. Although the causes of this price are unknown, it is speculated that Frank was past his prime as a labor force. On the final day of the sale, the remaining slaves were sold, as well as all of Bunn's lands in Nash County, with Stonewall Manor being sold to Benjamin Harrison. Through this auction, the history of Stonewall Manor was forever changed, and the Bunn family's era of influence on the house was brought to an end.
My name is Amaya Graham, and I'm here with Gladys Robinson, who is a descendant of Mariah Bunn Spade. So how did you feel when you found out that your great-great-grandmother was a slave here?
Well, I was shocked, surprised, and happy because I had found her location. I had really now found who she was. I was excited.
How do you think that she was treated here at Stonewall compared to other plantations?
I think she was treated very well because, as I noticed, I don't know too many people who would have said about their slave groups, I've got to get them myself, I don't have any money, but I'll take what few dollars I can, and I'll go and fight to keep them. And she did that. So she must have done along very well here.
So what prompted you to begin looking at your family history?
Well, back in the 1970s, I realized that I knew very little about the people in my family. And I started by using this chart. I started with my father, and I started asking him questions. And as you can see right here, I had quite a few names and things I had worked with. Then I turned to my mother and realized that she knew very little bit about the history of her father because her grandfather had died when her father was about 4 years old. So we knew there was an Aunt Alice Bunn Spade. She had helped to rear my grandfather. And from that point on, the search began. Did Alice have other sisters or brothers? Who were they? And that was the search, starting out in the 1970s.
During Harrison's time of ownership, the manor was called Little Brick Place and included very little farm equipment and few animals. Even though the manor was fully furnished, it was not considered his home, as he also owned the railroad plantation in Edgecombe, and his wife did not like living there. When Harrison died in 1856, the estate was distributed among his nieces and nephews. Kenham H. Lewis, a nephew of Harrison, inherited 126 acres of Stonewall Manor in 1856. Kelly Lewis, as he was often called, graduated from the University of North Carolina and practiced law in Tarboro. The year after Lewis inherited the house, he married Elizabeth Bryan and took a year-long wedding trip in Europe, purchasing furnishings for the manor. It is believed that during their trip, the double porch was added to the house. Stonewall was the home place for the Lewis plantations.
During the Lewis stay at the manor, the house was referred to as either the Little Falls Plantation or the Brick House Place by some, but most commonly known as the Lewis House to most. Cotton was no longer a staple crop at the Lewis house, but much livestock and fruit was produced. Lewis developed a reputation for producing apple brandy and wines made from blackberries, elderberries, and most significantly, scuppernong grapes. I assure you, I was a very little girl, but I remembered a long scuppernong grape arbor near the garden fence, and Lewis. The war between the states began in 1861, having little direct effect on Lewis's properties in Nash County, but he did lose slaves and property further east. The Lewis house and the nearby Rocky Mount Mills were unmolested until 1863, when a detachment from Potter's Raid of Pitt, Edgecombe, and Nash counties brought Major Ferris Jacobs' New York troops to the area. The mill, train depot, bridge, and locomotive were all damaged, but the Lewis house remained safe. Lewis's family did have encounters with the Yankees.
The Yankees went into Sister Martha's sitting room and in her bedroom. One of them put his hand on her breastpin and said he must have that. She told him he could not have it. It contained a likeness of Richard. He then asked for brandy. She told him there was none, but there was country wine, which he drank and left. Keenan Lewis to his wife in 1863.
The economy of North Carolina began to feel the pressure of occupying Union armies, a confederacy that was in disarray and a misguided financial theory of printing money with little to no backing. Inflation was rampant with paper money from the state and Confederate government losing value every day.
I have $40,000 in Confederate bonds and notes, which had better be exchanged for something else. I think Confederate bonds and notes will be worthless in 6 months unless there is a change for the better. Keenan Lewis to his wife in 1863.
Keenan Lewis passed away in 1866, and eventually there was yet another auction of the Lewis house and its belongings. Richard Lewis purchased Stonewall, but allowed Keenan's wife Elizabeth to reside there until she died. Little did he know that she would outlive him, not passing away until 1914. Those last few decades of life were hard on Elizabeth Lewis, as she had to figure out a way to keep plantation life viable without the use of slave labor. Eventually, she began to simply rent out sections of the property to tenant farmers in order to maintain her livelihood at Stonewall.
In 1916, Stonewall Manor was bought for $15,000 by the Rocky Mount Mills. The Mills added a bath in the back porch, as well as some other small renovations. The Rocky Mount Mills also replaced the exterior wood and added columns to the manor. Running water, electricity, and 2 furnaces are among the renovations that have occurred. President Bayer of Turkey visited Stonewall during his American tour in 1954. A gala was hosted at the manor upon his arrival.
The biggest challenge to face Stonewall Manor took place in 1969, when the state began plans for construction of the Highway 64 bypass. Initial plans had the road going through Stonewall's living room, leading to certain demolition of the manor. However, there was a rescue in the making. As the surveyors were laying out the path of 64 bypass, one of the surveyors, possibly survey specialist John G. Zemmer Jr., mentioned to local historian T.E. Ricks that by federal law, a road could not interfere with a historic landmark. Ricks and Dr. Margaret White Battle had recently formed the Nash County Historical Association and began a mission to have Stonewall listed on the National Register of Historic Places. A nomination to the National Register was prepared by the North Carolina Division of Archives and History and was approved on June 2, 1970. Disaster had been averted and Highway 64 was built a couple of hundred yards north of the manor. There were casualties to the new location, as a few homes in the Swelton Heights neighborhood were demolished, and in 1977 the famed Stonewall was moved closer to its house. This only cemented the name Stonewall Manor to the local residents who visited.
I'm Bailey Williams here with Mary Dyer at Stonewall Manor, and many people talk about the ghost stories that have happened here. Can you explain anything that you've experienced or have been told about?
So, there are many different things that spirits have at this house. most prevalent ones, I think, stories that people have is that one afternoon after a Civil War reenactment here, it was a man from Virginia who was in his clothing, and he was going upstairs through the house just to see what was going on in the rooms because he had never been to Stonewall before. And when he got to the children's room, as he walked toward the door to go in, there was a little boy at the window, and he was looking out toward what was then the stables area. And he turned around, he looked at the guy straight in the eye and said, "Oh, you've come for me." At which point the reenactor stopped dead, turned around, and ran downstairs to find Mr. Ricks to find out what is going on. So in further research by Mr. Ricks, it was found that there was a little boy and that he happened to love horses, and that's where the horses were usually kept. And apparently, ever since that episode, we've never seen him, or nobody's ever said that he's been around, so he must have gotten where he was going.
What are the future plans of Stonewall Manor? That is a very good question. Stonewall Manor is in disrepair. We've got issues from the roof down. We need a new roof. We need the funds for a new roof. We need repairs done to ceilings inside. We have had an estimate given to us of $200,000 to get Stonewall Manor back in pristine shape. It's going to take fundraisers. It's going to take private donations. We do everything here at Stonewall Manor, from homeschool tours to senior citizen tours. We do events. We host weddings here. We host family reunions. We host celebrations of life here. In fact, we've just had 2 celebrations of life that the folks put in the paper that in lieu of flowers, donate to Stonewall Manor, and we've gotten a lot of funds that way. We do not, there's a misconception, we do not get funds from Nash County, we don't get funds from the city, the state, federal, we get no money at all. We strictly operate and keep the lights on through private donations.
Over the years, Stonewall Manor has transformed itself in purpose, structure, and name. It has gone from the center of commerce, business, and culture to a place of learning, reflection, and celebration. Stonewall may not be the meeting place of well-to-dos and political shakers of Nash County, but it is the place to go to and speculate on how those people once lived their lives.